So my talk is called Back to the Earth, and it's thinking about sustainable design through scales of work, which is something that we've had the opportunity to explore lately. So I'll start, I won't read this, but some of you are familiar with the thinker George Bataille, who really talked about solar energy being the wealth that gives everything from organisms to corporations some ability of fitness, of excess, of luxury, etc. And we've thought about sustainable projects for a while now. These are some examples of some houses that I've executed or designed professionally. The one on the left was built. And some of that work has culminated in another house that a lot of you are probably familiar with. This was our 2011 solar decathlon entry. Now, the thing that's sort of shared by all of these projects is they are all hyper kind of performance analyzed so that they are passively strong, meaning they operate passively to a high degree prior to adding technology like solar panels and that kind of stuff to them. We've recently had the opportunity to jump scales and think about how sustainability works in terms of recycling. This is a scheme for the Department of Sanitation in New York, where we actually merged a recycling center with an environmental education center so that the whole idea of recycling could actually be witnessed by visitors to the space. And so it really becomes kind of active in teaching us about these kinds of issues of sustainability. A couple more shots. And you see, basically, there was a dumping platform where trucks came and dumped paper, plastic, glass, that sort of thing. They're sorted onto barges, and we really had to think about how material is transferred and then shipped to other places for actual recycling. All of this is visible, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, to people that are visiting the facility for other reasons. And this I actually consider a real middle scale of thinking in terms of our work with sustainability. And as some of you know, in December, it actually just got a lot bigger. We have just received a grant for about $100,000 to do one of these sustainable homes, but we're couching it in a larger kind of planning project of about 14 million square feet in Wuhan province in China. In Hubei province in China, Wuhan being the largest city there. It's about 4.48 million people. And specifically thinking about population as this kind of sustainable thing and density as this kind of sustainable thing is where our thinking is really starting to go as we've jumped scales. So this is the boundary area we were given. We were originally told by the provincial government in Hubei that we'd get about 50 acres, about 2 million square feet, and when they finally gave us what we were doing, it ended up being about 7 times as much. And so this idea of planning such a large piece of land in and of itself ends up being an issue. Our clients are primarily farmers. The farmland is rapidly vanishing in China, as a lot of you probably know, and farmers are being put in to large modern types of housing that frankly is not culturally sustainable. So this adds another dimension to it. So we started thinking about ideas of urbanization. I've been reading the CIA World Fact Book, which is a fantastic thing that you can get online, and just understanding how urbanization is sort of defined to those of us that, those outside of our profession. And then with some students, we started thinking about China in itself and some development patterns. And China is about the size of the continental United States. The states are about 9.6 million square kilometers, where China is about 9.7, same landmass. However, when you think about population, and this really kind of blows my mind, China has about 1.1 billion more people than we do. So that ends up being, in and of itself, a real issue when it comes to thinking about density and thinking about urbanization. The 2010 total of urban land in the United States is about 82%, whereas in China it's about 47%. The world is about 50%, so China's fairly on average. We are approaching densities that are seen a little bit more in Europe. But here's where it gets kind of interesting. Ultimately, by 2035, the urban population is expected to jump by about 70%, so over 1 billion people in China will be living in cities. The United States stays more or less where we are at about 82, maybe 85%, something like that. So then we started looking a little bit more specifically at the two countries. So in the US, as I said, we have about 9.6 million square kilometers of land. Of that, about 18% of our total land mass is arable, meaning it's suitable for agricultural production and or development. When we look at the amount of urban land mass, we have about 13% of our arable land, or about 238,000 square kilometers. And when we looked at China, we found out that they were similar in land mass. They were fairly similar in terms of arable land. They have a little bit less, 14%. But the total urban land mass in China is about 28,000 square kilometers. That's about a tenth of what we are. And you can't even see that little speck of green, which represents about 2% of the land mass. So as China expands and people move into cities and cities need to be developed, we're thinking that by about 2060, 50 years out, it will be about 6% of the arable land. But that 6%, remember, has to house over 1 billion people. So we've come up to some very quick conclusions about this kind of thing. The total urban density in the United States, urban population, excuse me, is just over 250 million. We have about 238,000 square kilometers, meaning our base density, and this is just a really dumb division here, is about 107 person per square kilometer. China now, not urbanized, but with a lot of people, has about 630,000 folks living in cities. However, their urban land mass, as I said, is a tenth of ours. It's about 28,000 square kilometers, meaning their density is 22,547 people per square kilometer. Okay, that is only second to what was witnessed in places like Jakarta and Southeast Asia in the 90s, where the population was as dense. As the population expands and more people move into cities and cities get developed, we're thinking that that's going to go down to about 12,000 or about 13,000 people per kilometer squared. I gave an example of Brooklyn, which is about 14,000 per kilometer squared. So China is becoming less dense, but will still have a rate of urban density near Brooklyn. Now, to put this in context, New Jersey, which happens to be one of the densest states in the Union, is probably at about 1,000, 1,100, something like that, equivalent to the Netherlands. So we are a very dense state, but imagine from this data that all urban planning and all urban design in China really needs to approximate the density of Brooklyn. So I'm going to take you through a couple of very preliminary slides. We've just started this project in the last few weeks. This was given to me by my colleague Zaewon Kyu, who is actually a land use planner and environmental person here in the Department of Chemical and Environmental Engineering. He said that this was once a farmer's house. And this is where this idea of going back to the earth really kind of comes into play. The idea that materials can be used to actually make them go away after a certain amount of time, or at least be used so that there's a real permanence to them. This idea of the 25-year roof or something like that really doesn't make sense given what we're dealing with here. And ultimately, I think the question is, how to make the extreme densities that we have to plan for be really livable and pleasant, given two seemingly potentially competing ideas. This is our client. This is one of our clients. And I mentioned before this idea of cultural sustainability. The population here is primarily farmers or farm assistants. They've worked the land for their entire lives. They're poorly educated. And in other places in China, they're being forced into these large masonry housing blocks, and they really don't know what to do with themselves. Consequently, things like suicide has raised and all that kind of thing. So we're working closely with some representatives as well as the provincial government in Hubei to really understand that. I'll just take you through some very quick slides, just thinking about how we're beginning to lay things out. And this includes adding a rail line, diverting an existing rail line. I know. Places, bike paths, green spaces, water, which ends up being a big issue in Hubei. It's not very clean, and routing water for cleanliness, as well as tapping into existing urban tracks. To our left is the sort of center of the city, if you will. And then phasing in sort of dense housing over this 50-year period. So this is where we are. We're very excited. I'm going to be leaving with a couple of students, actually 6 students. Some of them are here, and thank you for this work, in May. And in addition to putting forth a very competitive decathlon house in Beijing, actually in Datong, we're also going to be working a great opportunity to really plan some land that really needs it. So that's what I'm thinking about. Thanks.